Okay, so when a big global organization starts to lose value, deals fall apart, your best talent walks out the door, where do we usually point the finger? We often blame a bad strategy or maybe a single leader, but what if the real problem, the actual source of that value loss, is hiding in plain sight? We're going to dig into that and talk about why culture needs to be managed as a critical operational risk.
Right. Here's the fundamental mistake so many leaders make. We assume the strategy was just wrong, but that's almost never where the real damage happens. The truth is, most organizations don't fail in the planning phase. They fail in the execution phase, when a perfectly good strategy slams right into the wall of cultural friction. And look, this idea of cultural friction, it's not just some abstract HR buzzword. It creates very real, very tangible, and very expensive problems. The biggest mistake is treating these incidents like one-off fires, when they're actually symptoms of a much deeper systemic issue that's been quietly draining value from the business.
For example, you see it happen all the time when high-stakes M&A deals or crucial negotiations just stall out. And you ask why? Well, it's because of misaligned expectations, totally different communication styles, and all these unspoken assumptions across borders that can completely derail the entire process. It also shows up in your talent pool. Your high-performing people, the ones you absolutely cannot afford to lose, they start to check out. They disengage, or they just leave altogether. And this often happens because what leadership intends is getting misinterpreted, or their contributions are being misread through a completely different cultural lens. And finally, you see it in major reputational damage. You launch a product or a campaign that was a huge hit in one market, and it completely misses the mark, or worse, it's offensive in another. It fails because it just wasn't designed to connect with the local culture and realities on the ground. And here's the really crucial point. The typical response to all these problems is reactive. Most organizations only start talking about culture after the damage is done, after the deal has collapsed, the star employee has quit, or the campaign has backfired. But by then, it's too late. The cost is already on the books. So if these patterns are so destructive, you have to ask, why do they keep happening over and over again? Well, it's because there's a critical ownership gap, and it sits right at the very top of the organization. Think about it. As a company goes global, as it expands across new markets and new countries, its complexity just explodes. The problem is, the internal structure you need to actually manage all that cultural complexity almost never keeps pace, and that gap creates huge, unforeseen, and totally unmanaged risks. So ask yourself this. In your organization, who truly owns culture as an operational variable? Who is accountable for it? In most companies, the answer is no one. The responsibility is so spread out that in reality, no single executive is on the hook for the outcome. And let's be crystal clear about this. This isn't some symbolic or philosophical problem we're talking about. This is a practical, structural gap in governance that has very real financial and operational consequences. This is precisely the gap that a fractional chief culture officer is designed to fill. It's a practical solution to a very practical problem, and it works by introducing that missing piece, senior-level oversight. Now, what's really important to understand here is what this role isn't. A fractional CCO is not a trainer. They're not a workshop facilitator or a program manager. This role operates at the executive and the system level, focusing squarely on governance and strategic decision-making. So the work focuses on 5 core areas. First is executive decision advisory. That's about pressure testing choices at the top before they create friction down a line. Then there's early risk detection, spotting those dangerous cultural patterns across the business. A huge piece is leadership alignment, making sure an executive's intent actually lands correctly across different cultures. It also provides critical talent system insight, surfacing hidden biases and retention risks. And finally, market translation, making sure the internal culture is actually aligned with what the external market expects. And let's be really clear about the objective here. This isn't about making everyone feel good or achieving perfect harmony. The goal is clarity. It's about alignment. And ultimately, it's about making smarter, less risky business decisions. This is purely about operational effectiveness. But the structure of this role is just as important as what it does. So you might be asking, why a fractional model? Why not just go out and hire a full-time chief culture officer? Well, the role is fractional by design for 3 very specific reasons. First, that independence is key. It allows for clearer pattern recognition and the ability to give candid, unfiltered feedback to the C-suite.
Second, what organizations really need is senior oversight, not another full-time executive and all the bureaucracy that comes with it. And third, cultural risk is an ongoing variable, not a one-off project you can just solve and walk away from.
And to be absolutely explicit, this role does not replace other critical functions. It is not a DEI program, it is not a training initiative, and it's definitely not a substitute for HR. Instead, the fractional CCO ensures that all of those other valuable functions are actually aligned with the business strategy, with operational reality, and with overall risk management.
The outcomes here are tangible, and they directly address those symptoms we talked about at the very beginning. Organizations see fewer costly misunderstandings at the top. They see smoother execution across borders and much earlier detection of talent and brand risks. Ultimately, you get clear ownership, which dramatically reduces the need for those expensive reactive cleanups later on. So, this really leaves us with one final thought. Make no mistake, culture is already shaping your business outcomes every single day. The only real question is it happening with intention and with executive oversight, or is it all just happening by default?